CSC151. So, last video we went over what variables are. Now let's actually go in and do some variable math. But first and foremost, let's just, put our names on these assignments, Let's, general rule of thumb for all work, also put like your class in there or whatnot. So CSC151, whatever semester it is, so spring or fall, that sort of thing. Add the year, and then of course, probably put, like the name of the assignment on it as well or whatever. So I think we name this adding variables. Just general rule of thumb to make sure you always keep your stuff on your assignments. So we already know what variables are. So I'm just going to make a few variables here. I'm going to make exi, and I'm going to make that for integer. So I'll make that a 10, and then I'll make an ex s, and I'll make that a 25, but I'll make it a string. Notice how I have the quotes around it. That is not a number, that is just the text of a 2 and a 5. Okay, remember, the quotes means a string. I'll make a ex b, for example, Boolean, and I'll make that true. Then I'll make a ex f for an example float, and I'll make that 10.5. Why not? So I've got myself a couple of variables here. We already know how to make variables, and then of course we should already know how to make print statements. So I'll just print, and what? I'll even make a new line here. That /n stands for new line, which means it's going to break down to a new line. So let me just do that right here. So if I just type something behind it, you'll notice that there's one line of emptiness before it. And if I were to do another new line, new line, new line, new line, execute, you'll notice there's now, once it feels like loading, multiple new lines before it. So you can do new line to make new space instead of having to just keep making more blank print statements. So I'll just say this is an integer plus integer. Okay, now notice the plus is still in red, even though the plus normally means math. Because it is inside the quotes, it's a string, which means it's not doing any of its math functions. It's just doing the, I want to physically see the plus sign. Okay, and then we're going to separate this part of the string with a comma. So that part of the print statement, so the string is on this side, and then we can do our math over here. So I can do exi plus exi. So I've got my integer plus my integer. So in theory, 10 plus 10, I should get 20. And it'll go and print out like that. Execute. And once it feels like loading, yep, there it goes. Integer plus integer, 20. You know what? I'm going to make this even a little bit prettier looking. I'm going to have a colon. Actually, no, I'm going to have a tab, a /t for that tab, and then do the colon. So now I'll add a little space there. So now we've got a little colon right there, integer plus integer, and then I have the tab space right there. So that's how that works. You can do mathematics inside a print statement as long as it's separated and you have two like things. So I have an integer to an integer, it can understand that nice and easily. Now, if I were to do this instead and say, let me just copy and paste this in. If I were to do, say, a string to a string. So I'll switch that over to, S and S. So how is it going to do a string? Because the string is 25. So 25 plus 25 should be 50, right? You would be correct if it was an integer. However, it's a string. It's not recognizing the 25 as a math equate, as a number. It's recognizing it as physically hitting a 2, physically hitting a 5, the symbols of it. It's text. And when you add text together, all it does is it adds the text together. There's one text, there's the second text. They are, in essence, together. So 25, 25 is what you get with a string and a string. So let's go and say maybe we'll try an integer and a float. What is that going to do? Because they're both math equations, or they're both numbers, I should say, but one has the decimal point, the other does not. Execute, and what you'll see is that it will go and take the value. It'll make sure that it has the point on there as well. It will work, the float and the integer. So those guys will pop up together. Let's go with a Boolean and a Boolean. Oh, now this is going to be interesting. How do you do Boolean and Boolean? Because a Boolean is either true or false, yes or no, on or off, right? There's only two states to it. So how does one do example Boolean plus example Boolean? How do you add true and true? Well, the answer is going to be a little bit interesting if you know what, and here it is. The answer is 2. The answer is 2. Why is the answer 2? Well, because a true is basically equal to, let me put it this way, true equals 1, false equals 0. And that's how it runs. So if I were to switch this to false, it'll be 0 plus 0, which should get me a 0. And there it goes. The Boolean was a 0. But when I hit the true, so in fact you can kind of do math equations with a Boolean, but the only numbers are 1 and 0. And while I'm at it, let me just sort of add a few spaces into this just to hopefully get these guys to line up. There we go. Now they're lined up like that. Nice and pretty. So now, okay, so we can do that. What about Boolean plus an integer? Okay. How about if we did integer plus a Boolean? So I got example I plus example B. Okay, so the Boolean is currently 1, therefore, yep, 10 plus 1 equals 11. So yes, you can add an integer and a Boolean together. They are similar enough to do that. So let's try the big one. Let's try the big confusing one. Let's do an integer plus a string. So let me just go and switch this around. Now, I'm going to get an error right here the way it is right now. Execute. And it'll go and say unsupported error and types for plus, integer and string. I cannot do an integer and a string together. Like I said, how do you add 5 to lava? Lava does not represent a number of any sort. It's just the word lava. So, here's what we would have to do. We would have to convert this string into an integer. And this will only work if there's already numbers in there. If this was hello world, it won't work because you can't convert hello world into numbers. But I could put int and then parentheses, and now whatever is inside this parentheses will be converted into an integer. So now when I execute this, I should get 35 because that 25 that was inside the string will now be converted from 25 string into 25 integer. So what I'm actually doing is I'm doing an integer to an integer. And that's the only way you're going to be able to get a string and an integer to math together in the same print statement. Otherwise, you would just have to keep separating it, and you'd have to do some funky, some fun stuff to try and get around it any other way. This right here will return. You will see this later on. So get used to knowing how to switch the variables from one to another. I mean, you can do the same thing, but this time you can say, you can turn the integer into a string. You can do the same thing there. So if I were to make both of these strings, string I, so now they're not integers, they're now strings, and I will get the same sort of situation where you have the 10s are now 10, 10. Same thing, but it's not integer to integer anymore. It's now string to string. You can do that and swap these guys back and forth between what they want to be. So just get used to understanding that. And once you get something that looks like this, save it, print it out, submit it through Canvas, and you're good to go. I'll see you on Thursday where we're going to do some fun things with some strings and some fun things with integers. We'll be going back, we'll be doing a little bit of both. And there we go. So, see you in a few. Have a great day. See you in the next video. Bye. Bye-bye.